Coldwater wasn't the kind of town that made headlines. It was small, quiet, and too ordinary for its own good. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved at strangers without asking questions. But that was before the deaths. They started with whispers. A boy found in his bed, stiff and pale, his eyes stretched wide open as if something inside his skull had frozen him mid-scream. Then a woman, healthy, middle-aged, collapsed in her home, the sheets tangled around her body like she had thrashed in terror. No blood, no wounds. Just the same expression, shock, fear, disbelief. The coroner couldn't explain it. The doctors muttered about cardiac arrest or undiagnosed conditions. But people in town felt the truth settling like a weight in their stomachs. Something was happening inside their sleep. Ava Delaney was 17 when she saw the first body. It wasn't supposed to happen. Her mother worked in the clinic, and Ava had been told to wait in the lobby. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, pulled her down the hall. Through the crack of an open door, she saw him, Eric Dalton, a boy from her class. His skin looked waxy, drained of color, as though his veins had collapsed. His mouth was frozen half open, lips dry and cracked, like he had been gasping for air no one could give him. But it was his eyes that stayed with her. They weren't closed the way you'd expect in death. They bulged, bloodshot, glassy, trapped in a final moment of pure, consuming terror. Ava had nightmares about them long before she realized she could no longer afford to dream at all. By the end of that week, 3 more had died. Then 5. Always the same way, asleep, gone, leaving nothing but sheets damp with sweat and faces locked in twisted horror. People in Coldwater stopped saying, "Good night." They stopped talking about dreams altogether. Sleep had become a trap, a door that once opened refused to let you back out. Rumors began to spread like infection. Kids at school whispered about shadows that moved at the edge of vision, about voices that whispered in your ear the second you drifted off. A truck driver claimed he saw his dead wife's face every time he closed his eyes, grinning with jagged teeth that were never hers. A teacher swore something crawled into his room at night and sat on his chest until he couldn't breathe. He tried to stay awake for 2 days before collapsing in the middle of class. He never woke again. And through it all, Ava couldn't shake Eric's last words to her. The day before his death, he had stopped her in the hallway, his face pale, trembling, as though the air itself made him sick. "Don't sleep tonight," he had whispered. "It's waiting." She had laughed it off at the time, too uncomfortable to ask what he meant. But now, alone in her darkened room, those words pulsed inside her skull like a living thing. That night, Ava tried to fight it. Coffee. Music. The sharp sting of her nails digging into her palm. Her eyes burned, her body begged for release, but fear kept her alert. Her room seemed alive, the shadows swayed, stretched long across her walls, moving when nothing else did. And then she heard it. At first, just a faint scratch, like fingernails dragging slowly across her windowpane. Then another sound, low, wet breathing, the kind you only hear when someone is too close, too heavy in the chest. Ava froze, her heart pounding so violently she was sure it would burst. She told herself it was the wind, a trick of her exhausted brain. But when she looked toward the window, she saw it. A shape pressed against the glass, a face too distorted to be human. Its skin sagged like melting wax, its teeth too many, too sharp, smiling wide as if it knew something she didn't. And its eyes were Eric's. Wide, bloodshot, trapped in eternal panic. Ava screamed and blinked, and it was gone. The window was empty again, moonlight casting innocent silver streaks across her floor. But the sound didn't stop. The scratching turned into knocking, soft at first, then louder, more desperate. Tap. 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 Like someone begging to be let in. Ava clamped her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth on the bed, whispering to herself, "Stay awake. Stay awake. Stay awake." But deep down, she knew the truth. Sleep was no longer a choice in Coldwater. It was a hunt. And they were all prey. That was the first night Ava understood the new rule of the town. Close your eyes, and you're gone. Open them, and the horror never ends. By the second week, Coldwater had become a town of ghosts, living ghosts who were too afraid to shut their eyes. Sleep had turned into a death sentence, and no one wanted to be next. The diner that once smelled of coffee and pie now reeked of sweat, burnt caffeine, and unwashed bodies. Families huddled in booths with thermoses clutched in their hands, their eyes ringed in dark bruises from nights without rest. The local gas station sold out of energy drinks, black coffee, even over-the-counter stimulants. Nobody cared about health anymore, survival meant staying awake. Ava sat in the corner of that diner, watching the town unravel. Her mother, Dr. Karen Delaney, had set up a makeshift clinic in the back room. Half the town cycled in and out, begging for sleeping pills to not take, begging for answers Karen didn't have. "They're dying anyway," Ava overheard one man say. "Awake or asleep? What's the point?" His wife smacked his arm, her voice breaking, "Don't say that. Don't you dare say that in front of our kids." But the kids already knew. Children who once ran through the streets of Coldwater now sat silent, their eyes too wide, too aware. They had seen their classmates vanish into nightmares they couldn't escape. Even the smallest ones whispered about shadows that whisper names. Ava wasn't much better off. She had been awake for almost 3 days. Her body felt heavy, her stomach twisted, and her thoughts blurred at the edges. But the fear, that suffocating, skin-crawling fear, kept her tethered. When she tried to close her eyes, even for a second, she saw him. Eric. His pale face against her window. His lips mouthing words she could almost hear but never understand. And worse, when she blinked too long, the image stayed burned into the darkness behind her eyelids. She wasn't sure anymore which was worse, the horror waiting in sleep, or the madness clawing at her when she stayed awake. On the third night, Ava's best friend, Marcy, called her. "You're still awake, right?" Marcy's voice was shaky, too fast, like she was afraid silence itself might kill her. "Yeah," Ava whispered. "I don't think I can sleep even if I wanted to." "Good. Don't." Marcy hesitated. "My mom, she fell asleep on the couch. Just for a minute." "Ava," she screamed like something was tearing her apart. She wouldn't wake up. Her eyes, God, her eyes. Marcy's sobs drowned the rest. Ava gripped the phone so tight her knuckles turned white. "What about you?" she asked, desperate. "I'm still holding on. Coffee, pills, anything. But... Ava, what if it's not about sleep? What if it's already inside us? Like we've been marked?" Her words lingered long after the call ended, burrowing into Ava's skull. Marked. The thought made her skin crawl. That night, Ava's mother forced her to lie down. "You can't keep this up," Karen said, her face drawn, her eyes bloodshot. She hadn't slept either. "Your body will shut down on its own. You'll collapse. At least lie down for an hour." Ava wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. The second she stretched on the couch, exhaustion crashed over her like a tide. Her eyelids trembled, heavy, begging to close. That was when she heard it. The low hum. At first, it sounded like static from the old television in the corner. Then it deepened, vibrating inside her bones, a thick, pulsing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She sat up, heart pounding. "Mom. Do you hear that?" But her mother was gone. The room was empty. "No," Ava whispered. Her throat tightened. She hadn't seen Karen leave. She hadn't heard a door open. The hum grew louder, shifting into voices. Dozens of them, layered, whispering in unison. She couldn't make out the words, but they scraped against her ears, sharp and wrong. Then the lights flickered. And something moved. Not outside, not in the shadows, inside the room. Black shapes writhing against the ceiling, stretching long, thin arms that dragged across the walls. They were like stains leaking out of reality, bending the air around them. One of them dropped low, its face inches from Ava's. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught. Its skin was nothing but a rippling void, but its eyes were familiar. Wide. Bloodshot. Trapped in endless panic. Eric's eyes. No, Ava whispered, backing away. You're not real. You're not real. The thing leaned closer. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, splitting its face in two. Inside was nothing but darkness and teeth. Too many teeth. Then it spoke. Ava, it whispered. Her heart nearly stopped. And that's when she realized the truth, staying awake wasn't saving them. The nightmare was bleeding into the waking world. By the fourth night, Coldwater was no longer a town. It was a graveyard that hadn't finished burying itself. Streetlights buzzed and flickered as if they too were too tired to keep glowing. Cars sat abandoned, doors left open, like their owners had simply walked away and never returned. The air carried a smell Ava couldn't place, burnt wires, copper, something metallic and rotten beneath it all. No one dared to be alone anymore. Families gathered in living rooms, eyes wide, holding flashlights like weapons. Some people tied their own wrists to chairs so they wouldn't collapse if sleep overtook them. Others mutilated themselves with needles or cuts, pain their last desperate anchor to reality. But even pain wasn't working anymore. Ava hadn't seen her mother in 2 days. Karen worked around the clock in the clinic, patching up the sleepless, watching others waste away. Ava stayed with Marcy instead, both girls barricaded inside Marcy's house. Empty energy drink cans littered the floor, their hands shaking too much to hold the cans steady anymore. Marcy's face was pale, her lips cracked, but her eyes were the worst, bloodshot, hollow, like they belonged to someone twice her age. They don't want us to stay awake, she whispered that night, rocking slightly in her chair. That's why it hurts. That's why our bodies are shutting down. They're pulling us under. Don't say that, Ava snapped, too sharply, though her own voice trembled. Marcy didn't answer. She just stared at the wall. At first Ava thought it was exhaustion, but then she saw it too. The wallpaper was bleeding. At first, just faint streaks, thin as veins. Then thicker, redder, the liquid dripping down in slow rivulets. It wasn't paint. It wasn't trick of the light. It was blood. The smell hit Ava first, sharp and iron-rich, the stink of open wounds. Oh my God, Marcy whispered, pressing her hand over her mouth. The blood wasn't just dripping, it was forming shapes. Words. The letters smeared and shifted, but Ava could read them. Sleep. The word repeated, over and over, in long, crooked lines across the wall. The letters twisted into each other until they no longer looked like language, but like something alive, writhing. The house groaned. The ceiling shivered. And then they heard it. Screams. Not from outside. From inside the walls. Dozens of them, muffled and frantic, like people buried alive just beneath the plaster. Marcy bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock. We have to get out. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed them whole, thick and suffocating. Ava couldn't see her own hands. She could only hear Marcy's shallow, panicked breathing beside her, and the screams pressing closer from the walls. And then something else. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Not running, coming for them. Ava grabbed Marcy's arm, pulling her back. Don't move, she hissed, though her own voice was barely more than a ragged breath. The footsteps dragged closer, leaving wet sounds. Against the wood floor, as though something dripping and rotten was moving barefoot. And then, breathing hot, fetid, right behind them. Marcy whimpered. Ava wanted to scream, but her throat locked. Her entire body stiffened as if invisible hands had gripped her spine. She could feel the thing's presence bending the air, heavier than gravity. The lights flickered once, for a split second. Just long enough for Ava to see it. A tall, skeletal figure, skin stretched thin over jagged bones. Its face was featureless except for a wide, black slit of a mouth grinning ear to ear. And above that mouth, pressed into its forehead like a cruel brand, were Eric's eyes, bloodshot, bulging, still screaming silently. The light died again. Something wet brushed against Ava's cheek. A tongue. She screamed and kicked, stumbling into Marcy, and the two of them ran blind into the dark. They slammed into the front door, yanking it open. Cold air hit them like a slap. They bolted into the street without looking back. The town outside wasn't safer. Houses glowed faintly from within, every window pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Shadows moved inside those houses, long arms dragging across the curtains, heads bending at impossible angles. And above it all, the sky churned like an open wound. Clouds the color of bruises twisted, and faint streaks of red lightning cracked silently across them. Ava grabbed Marcy's hand. Both were shaking so hard they could barely stand. "They're not just in our sleep anymore," Marcy whispered. "They're here." And Ava knew she was right. Sleep hadn't just become deadly. It had infected reality itself. Every second awake only fed it. Every scream only gave it shape. The nightmare was no longer a place they entered. It was a place they could never leave. Coldwater was no longer a town. It was a stage for suffering, and every night the performance grew louder, more grotesque. Ava and Marcy hadn't slept in 5 days. Their bodies screamed for it, their heads swam with dizziness, but neither dared close their eyes. The streets were crawling with the remnants of people who had. Some were corpses, left where they fell, faces twisted in silent screams. Others weren't so lucky. They still moved. Not alive. Not fully dead. Just trapped. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, mouths muttering words that made no sense. Some clawed at the ground until their nails ripped free, leaving trails of blood. Others wandered, jerking like puppets yanked by invisible strings. They weren't human anymore. They were nightmares wearing skin. Ava and Marcy stayed low, moving from shadow to shadow. They had left Marcy's house behind, too afraid to go back. The street stank of rot, of sweat, of the faint copper tang of blood. Every corner carried danger. Every window seemed to hide something watching. The church became the gathering place. Dozens of people filled its pews, their heads slumped, jerking awake every few minutes when exhaustion tried to pull them under. The priest, Father Jennings, stood at the altar, his voice hoarse, trying to hold on to faith that had long since cracked. "They cannot take what we refuse to give," he rasped, clutching the cross in trembling hands. "If we stay awake, if we endure, they cannot win." But even as he spoke, one of the parishioners slumped sideways. A woman shook him violently, shrieking his name. His chest rose and fell once, twice, and then stopped. His eyes snapped open, wide and shining with unnatural light. His mouth stretched, far wider than any human mouth could, splitting his cheeks open with a wet tearing sound. The scream that poured out wasn't his voice. It was dozens of voices. Hundreds. A chorus of shrieks and whispers that filled every corner of the church. The pews erupted into panic. People shoved and trampled each other to get away. The man's body convulsed, his skin splitting open as black tendrils clawed their way out, writhing like snakes. They lashed out, wrapping around a woman's throat and snapping it before she could even scream. Ava pulled Marcy toward the door, the air thick with the smell of burning flesh, though nothing was on fire. They shoved their way into the night, stumbling into the streets, their ears ringing with the screams inside. The church collapsed behind them. Not from flames, not from bombs, but from something inside. The walls cracked outward as if the building itself had been devoured from within. When the roof caved in, Ava swore she saw faces in the dust cloud, faces stretching, howling, begging. The crowd scattered. But there was nowhere left to go. Coldwater's nights no longer ended. The sky remained dark even when morning should have come. Time itself seemed to buckle, hours bleeding into each other until nobody knew if it was day 3 or day 10. The sun had abandoned them, leaving only a blood-colored moon that never set, watching like a predator's eye. Marcy's condition worsened. Her speech slurred, her hands shook uncontrollably. She scratched at her own skin, muttering about things crawling underneath. "They want inside," she whispered. "They're under the skin, Ava. You can feel them if you press hard enough." She pressed until her nails broke skin. Ava tore her hands away, tears burning her eyes. "Stop it. You're not making sense." But deep down, she feared Marcy was right. Ava had begun to feel it too, that itch beneath the flesh, a buzzing like flies trapped in her veins. They found her mother in the clinic. Or what was left of her. Karen sat slumped in a chair, still breathing, still alive, but barely. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. The walls around her were smeared in words written in blood, the same word over and over: sleep. "Mom," Ava whispered, shaking her shoulder. Karen's head snapped toward her with unnatural speed. Her mouth opened, and a voice that wasn't hers rasped out. "Sleep, Ava. We're waiting for you." Ava stumbled back. Her mother's jaw kept moving, her lips trembling, but the words no longer matched her. "It's beautiful here," Karen whispered, her voice finally her own. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "But you can't come back. Don't sleep, Ava. Please." Her head slumped forward. For a moment Ava thought she was gone. But then Karen's chest rose again, slow and ragged. Still alive. Trapped in a tug-of-war between worlds. And Ava knew with horrifying certainty, there was no saving her mother. No saving anyone. The nightmare wasn't coming for them anymore. They were already inside it. Coldwater was dead. Not officially, not on paper, but in every way that mattered. The streets were empty, except for those who wandered aimlessly, the half-dead caught between waking and nightmare. They twitched and jerked like broken marionettes, their jaws slack, words bubbling from their throats that no human language could form. They had become part of it now, the nightmare wearing them as disguises, like meat puppets. Ava and Marcy hid in an abandoned hardware store. The air reeked of mildew and dust, but it was shelter from the streets, from the shadows that stretched too long, from the windows that showed faces that shouldn't exist. They sat together in the aisle between shelves of nails and broken tools. Ava counted her breaths, clinging to the rhythm to stop her mind from unraveling. Marcy rocked in silence, her fingernails raw from scratching at her arms. "Do you hear it?" Marcy whispered. Ava froze. "Hear what?" Marcy leaned closer, her voice hoarse. "They're chewing. Always chewing. Like they're eating through the walls, through us." Ava shook her head. "It's just in your head. You're tired." But then she heard it too. A faint, wet gnawing. Not outside. Not far away. Inside the walls of the store. A sound like teeth grinding against bone. The shelves rattled. A hammer clattered to the floor. And then the sound stopped. The silence was worse. Ava's chest tightened as she strained to listen. Her ears filled with the rush of her own blood, so loud she almost missed it, a breath, long and heavy, inches away. She whipped her head around. Nothing. Empty aisle. But when she turned back to Marcy, she wasn't alone. A shape loomed behind her. It was tall, too tall, its head brushing the ceiling. Its skin was stretched too tight, gray and slick, ribs jutting out like jagged spikes. Its mouth opened slowly, wide enough to unhinge its jaw, and from inside came the sound, wet chewing, as though it had swallowed something still alive and was savoring every bite. Marcy didn't see it. Her eyes were glassy, blinking slow, her body slumping sideways. Marcy. Ava grabbed her shoulders, shaking hard. Don't close your eyes. Marcy's lips parted. Just a second. Just. I'm so tired. The thing bent closer. Its mouth widened until it split the skin of its face, and something black dripped out, thick, wriggling like worms. Ava screamed, yanking Marcy to her feet. They stumbled through the aisle, crashing into shelves, cans and tools spilling around them. Behind them came the sound of claws dragging along the tile. They burst through the back door into the night. The town was worse than before. Every building bled. Windows dripped with thick, black ooze, and the walls bulged outward like something inside was pressing to get free. The sky was a swirl of red and black, the moon a swollen eye leaking streaks of crimson. The air itself tasted foul, metallic, heavy, like they were breathing in decay. All around them, the people of Coldwater shuffled, their eyes open, glowing faintly. Some laughed. Some screamed without sound. Others tore at their own flesh as if they could dig the nightmare out from under their skin. Marcy clutched Ava's arm. It's feeding. Can't you feel it? Every scream, every second we stay awake, it's eating us. Ava wanted to deny it, but she could feel it too. The heaviness in her chest. The buzzing under her skin. The gnawing ache in her bones. Like something hollowed her out from the inside, and every hour it grew hungrier. They weren't fighting sleep anymore. They were feeding it. They ran, but there was nowhere left untouched. They passed the playground where children once laughed. The swings moved on their own now, creaking in the dead air. Shadows sat in them, tall and wrong, their legs dangling but never touching the ground. They passed the grocery store, its glass doors shattered. Inside, bodies hung from the ceiling like meat, swaying gently, their mouths sewn shut with veins. Marcy gagged, falling to her knees. We can't fight it, Ava. We're already inside it. Ava grabbed her, hauling her up. No. We keep moving. We don't stop. We don't sleep. But even as she said it, she felt her own eyelids flutter, her body trembling. Every step was heavier than the last. Her mind wavered at the edges, reality bending. She couldn't tell if the screams in the distance were real, or if they were already in her head. They reached the edge of town just before dawn, if dawn even existed anymore. The road stretched out, empty, vanishing into a horizon painted with black fog. But something waited there. Figures lined the road, standing shoulder to shoulder. Not alive. Not fully dead. Their faces were the faces of Coldwater, friends, neighbors, classmates. Eric among them, his eyes still bulging, mouth stretched into a permanent scream. They swayed in unison, whispering one word over and over, voices stitched together like a chant. Sleep. 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 Marcy broke. She dropped to her knees, sobbing, her hands clawing at her face. I can't anymore. I can't. I just wanted to stop. Ava held her, but her own strength was gone. The chanting filled her skull. The hunger in her veins screamed. The shadows pressed closer. And for the first time, she wondered if fighting was worse than surrender. Because maybe the nightmare wasn't killing them at all. Maybe it was just waiting for them to belong. Ava no longer trusted her own eyes. Every blink betrayed her. Every slow dip of her lids carried her across a border she didn't want to cross. She couldn't tell if she was awake or if she'd already slipped under, trapped in the nightmare's jaws. Marcy was worse. She stumbled beside Ava like a puppet with its strings tangled. Her lips moved constantly, whispering things that made no sense, half prayers, half screams. Her fingernails were gone, snapped off from clawing at her own arms. Blood crusted in lines where she had scratched too deep. She didn't even seem to notice anymore. They hadn't eaten in days. Neither could swallow without gagging. The food tasted rancid, crawling with maggots that weren't really there, or maybe they were. Water turned thick in their mouths, coating their tongues like syrup. Survival itself was poisoned. The town was dissolving around them. Houses sagged inward, as if the wood itself was rotting from within. Doors opened into endless black corridors. Street lamps bent into jagged shapes, buzzing faintly, their light illuminating shadows that didn't match the bodies that cast them. And above everything, the sky pulsed like a wound. The blood-red moon throbbed in the sky, dripping streaks of light that fell like rain, leaving smoking holes where they landed. The stars were gone, swallowed. The horizon was gone, eaten. The world was shrinking, folding in on Coldwater as if it was the last mouthful in some enormous feast. They found refuge in the high school gymnasium. Or what was left of it. Dozens of people had gathered there, or maybe only a handful. Ava couldn't tell. Their faces shifted in the half-light, blurring, melting, changing. Some looked like strangers. Some looked like people Ava had known her whole life. One looked like her father, though he'd been dead for years. They were all awake. None of them spoke. They sat in a circle, trembling, eyes wide, as if waiting. Ava pulled Marcy to the edge of the circle. "What are they doing?" she whispered. No one answered. But she felt it. A low vibration in the floor, like a heartbeat beneath the wood. The group was swaying gently in unison. Their mouths moved, whispering in a language Ava didn't know but somehow understood. The words slid into her skull like knives. "It's easier if you stop fighting. It's warmer here. No pain. Just sleep." Her knees buckled. She bit her tongue hard enough to taste blood, the pain pulling her back. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. "No, no, no." Marcy didn't resist. She staggered forward, falling to her knees in the circle, her lips moving in time with theirs. "Marcy!" Ava screamed, grabbing her arm. Marcy turned. Her eyes weren't her own anymore. They were hollow pits, black as the sky above, with something squirming just beneath the surface. Her mouth stretched in a smile too wide, tearing the corners of her lips. "I'm not tired anymore," Marcy whispered. "I'm home." Ava stumbled back, horror clenching her stomach. The circle leaned toward her, hands reaching, skin blistered and peeling, fingernails falling off in strips. They moved together, a hive of flesh, one mind stretching across too many mouths. Ava bolted for the exit, the gym echoing with the sound of their chant. Her footsteps pounded on the wood, but the sound beneath it, the heartbeat, grew louder, shaking the entire building. The floor split open. From the crack, something rose. Not a hand. Not a body. A mass. A pulsing, writhing lump of meat and shadow, mouths opening and closing all over it, each one shrieking in a different voice. She saw her classmates' faces, her mother's face, Eric's eyes, all pressed into its surface like a living collage of terror. It towered above her, its voices speaking in unison. "Sleep, Ava. Sleep, and you'll never wake again." She ran. She didn't look back. Outside, the air had changed. It was heavier now, pressing against her lungs. Every breath burned, like inhaling smoke. Her vision blurred at the edges, her body trembling violently. Her legs barely moved. And then she saw it. The streets were gone. The buildings gone. The town was collapsing inward, folding like paper. The edges of Coldwater peeled back, falling into a chasm of black nothing. The world itself was shrinking into a dream. There was nowhere left to run. Eva collapsed to her knees, clutching her head, screaming into the void. The sound came back to her, multiplied, echoed by 1,000 voices that weren't hers. And as the ground trembled beneath her, as the last pieces of her world disintegrated into the dark, Eva realized something far worse than death. The nightmare wasn't chasing them. It had already won. Eva's body was giving out. Her eyes burned, her vision fractured into double images that wouldn't align. Her throat was raw from screaming, her lips split and bleeding. She had resisted for as long as she could, but the body always betrays itself. Every nerve screamed for rest. Every muscle begged to collapse. Her mind was a shredded rope, fraying with each second she clung to the edge. But there was no edge anymore. The town of Coldwater no longer resembled a town. Streets curled into spirals, buildings melted like wax, people flickered between forms, neighbors, family members, strangers, and then nothing but skin stretched too thin over bone. The nightmare had spread so far that Eva could not tell if she was still in the world of the living or already swallowed whole. Marcy's voice still echoed in her head, "I'm home." The memory of her best friend's hollow eyes gnawed at her more than hunger, more than fear. Eva wanted to believe she could save someone, anyone, but deep down, she knew that everyone who had closed their eyes was already gone. Gone into it. The heartbeat of the dream rumbled beneath her feet, stronger now, shaking the streets as though the whole town were the chest cavity of some gigantic, unseen beast. Thud. 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 It wasn't just inside the ground. It was inside her chest, sinking with her pulse, as though her blood no longer belonged to her. Eva staggered forward, through what had once been Main Street. Bodies lined the sidewalks, twitching in fits, eyes open but seeing nothing. Some had sewn their own eyelids open with jagged threads. Some had gouged their eyes out altogether. The sight churned her stomach, but worse than the gore was the expression etched on every face, relief. They had given in. They had gone home. And she was the last one still fighting. The sky split. A jagged tear ripped across the horizon, and from it spilled a light that was not light at all, too heavy, too dense, pressing down like the weight of the ocean. Eva dropped to her knees, covering her ears, though the sound wasn't sound either, it was inside her skull, drilling into her thoughts. A voice. No, not one. All of them. Everyone who had ever lived in Coldwater, everyone who had ever fallen asleep, whispering in unison through the rent sky. You were never awake. You've always been dreaming. Eva's chest seized. Her breath rattled, shallow and thin. No, she whispered, her words torn apart by trembling. I'm awake. I'm still awake. The sky peeled back further, and the thing beyond revealed itself. It wasn't a creature in any form she could understand. It was a horizon of flesh, a sea of mouths gnashing, eyes rolling in different directions, arms sprouting only to wither away. It was infinite, sprawling, a cancer that devoured the world and reshaped it into itself. And from within it, she saw her own reflection. Her face, pale and broken. Her eyes, rimmed in black. Her lips whispering words she hadn't spoken aloud. It's easier if you stop fighting. It's warmer here. No pain. Just sleep. She clawed at her own skin, trying to tear the thought out, but it wasn't hers anymore. Her body moved without her consent. Her hands reached upward, as though in worship. The hunger for sleep wasn't just in her. It was her. Eva's head dropped forward. Her lids fluttered. Her breath slowed. 1 second. 2 seconds. Darkness. She felt the pull immediately, like being dragged underwater, 1,000 hands clutching her, pulling her down. She saw Marcy there, smiling, her face shifting between childhood and death. She saw her mother's face, her father's. She saw everyone she'd ever known, all waiting for her in the black. And beneath them all, deeper still, was the endless thing that had birthed the nightmare. It opened itself to her. She fell into its maw. When Ava's eyes opened again, the town was gone. There was no cold water. No streets. No sky. Only an endless plain of ash and bone, stretching forever. She stood in the center of it, her feet sinking into the soft, pulsing ground. She looked down. It wasn't earth she stood on. It was flesh. The plain shuddered, and she realized it wasn't still. Millions of bodies shifted beneath the surface, pressed together, moaning in their sleep. She saw her own face among them. And when she tried to scream, her voice came back 1,000 times louder, echoing across the plain, her scream carried by every mouth, every throat, every body trapped in the dream. There was no waking. There never had been. Ava finally understood. This wasn't about staying awake. It was about realizing that no one had ever truly been awake at all. The nightmare wasn't coming. The nightmare was the world. And she belonged to it now. Never sleep again. Never wake again. No rest for the living.